Hey guys, welcome back to another reaction video from a carnivore. This channel is not just about eating meat, though I still eat meat 100% of the time, and it has been a wonderful experience. It's been a wonderful change. By the way, the reason I look a little sweaty and dirty is I just got back from walking. Sam's back there sleeping on the cold tile because he's worn out, but he had fun going walking again, and we've been doing that off and on for the past week because I've been trying to get back to basics on my exercise. And for those of you who know that I've been going through a lot in my personal life lately, I'm not going to be even going into any of that today. I just want to say that I know I'm not the only one. I know there's a lot of people out there who are going through it just as bad as I am, if not worse. And I think it's almost systemic right now how much pressure is being applied to everybody, especially people who are trying to do the right thing, especially for fathers and husbands who are trying to do the right thing by their family, for wives and mothers who are trying to do the right thing by their family. There's division in family right now. There's fighting about things that are just obviously insanity on one side and obviously good on the other side. But seems like so many people have got it all reversed. It's making us all a little crazy. So I thought it would be good to take a look at this video called "We Are All Suffering from Toxic Exposure," because this is something I have talked about many times on my channel when I talk about what's wrong with the food we've been eating, what's wrong with the medications we've been taking, what's wrong with the things that we're putting in the air and in the fields of our lands, and how we're affecting our bodies and minds in such a negative way. And judging by the picture in the background of this video here, it shows somebody spraying fields, so I'm sure that's going to be a part of it. But this features Max Legouver. You know what? I already know I'm going to get heck about any pronunciation of anybody's name, especially if it sounds like a French name, which this kind of sounds like to me. Sorry, French people. I do not know how to speak French properly. I do not know how to do the accents. I take pride in getting my accents right on a lot of languages, especially when it comes to the Romance languages like Italian and Spanish. But I have a real hard time with French names. But anyway, this Max Legouver is a filmmaker and health author that Jordan Peterson is talking to, where they discuss the morbid state of health, propaganda, and the manufactured toxins making people sick in the modern world. And I thought that was worth us taking a look at together. I haven't seen it yet, so we're going to be watching it together for the first time, and you'll get my reaction as we go through it. I hope you find it useful.
So you talked about non-modifiable and modifiable risk factors, and we went through obesity and diabetes, which are also linked. What else? What else is modifiable?
Hypertension. So high blood pressure. About 50% of adults today have hypertension. We're starting to see pre-hypertension in adolescence as well.
Oh, good.
But one of the seminal studies in the field of dementia prevention is it's known as the SPRINT Mind trial, which found that when people with hypertension were aggressively treated via pharmacological means for their hypertension, they saw a dramatic risk reduction for the development of cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, in fact, which is considered like a prodrome of dementia, a form of pre-dementia, if you will. But we know that, lifestyle modification, dietary, exercise, for example, all are, as effective as drugs. And when you have hypertension, essentially the blood vessels that are supplying blood, nutrients, oxygen to the brain are essentially damaged. And so, hypertension is incredibly damaging to the brain.
Okay. You said there were 12.
Yeah.
I think can we go through all of them?
We can go through, I mean, so those are the ones that I think that are most relevant to diet. But I think it's important at this, juncture to state that nutrition is not the only variable here. So I'll never know what caused my mom's dementia, unfortunately, although it's an investigation that's going to continue on through the rest of my life. But, nutrition is one slice of the pie. And so among the modifiable risk factors, you have, non-nutrition related risk factors such as exposure to excessive air pollution on a chronic basis, which as of the 2020 Lancet Commission on Dementia was finally acknowledged as being a risk factor for the development of dementia. We've seen studies run in, for example, Mexico City, where they've seen pathological changes that are associated with Alzheimer's disease in the cadavers of adolescents and children. People who have died in Mexico City, who have been exposed over the course of their lives to, excessive levels of air pollution, like fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, for example, that they see an undue aggregate of, amyloid beta, for example, which is the protein that forms the plaques that, is one of the defining characteristics. Is that an
inflammatory consequence too, or does anybody know?
Yes.
It is?
Yeah. There's an inflammatory consequence. There's a cardiovascular consequence to being exposed to air pollution. With regard to your cardiovascular system, we know that what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And conversely, what's bad for the heart is bad for the brain. And so air pollution, plays a major role. An area that I think is incredibly exciting, also very scary, but ultimately empowering is, looking at certain environmental pollutants, like certain industrial solvents. For example, there's a compound that there's another fantastic neurologist who has become a friend and colleague, and I think his work is incredibly important. His name is Ray Dorsey, Dr. Ray Dorsey. He's a University of Rochester neurologist who has done a lot of work exposing the link between exposure to certain chemical solvents that are still widely being used in the United States, like trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, and the etiology of Parkinson's disease and related conditions like Lewy body dementia, which is the condition that my mom suffered from. And so we know that, what we breathe, what we eat, these are all having an impact on our health. But now the evidence is really starting to emerge that, that the brain is not, does not sit in this privileged ivory tower where it's immune somehow to, what it is that we're eating and the compounds that we're, inhaling. The brain sits directly downwind of, a lot of the insults that are being waged by modern life, modern living. The trappings of modern society come at a cost, and we're starting to see that they now are likely having an impingement in our collective brain health. So, one of these compounds, trichloroethylene, which I just referenced, is still being used to spot clean in dry cleaning applications. And it's an incredibly volatile compound. It readily evaporates. It easily, infiltrates groundwater. And obviously, occupational exposure to these compounds is really bad. But there have been a small handful of epidemiologic studies that show that exposure to a compound like TCE, for example, is associated with a 500% increased risk of the development of Parkinson's disease. This is a compound that was used medically up until the 70s. It was used with, to decaffeinate coffee. It was used as an anesthetic for pregnant women. It's still being used as a metal degreaser. And again, it's used to spot clean in dry cleaning applications.
Now I'm skeptical of all my suits.
Yeah, well, you definitely want to not dry clean, or at least make sure that the dry cleaner that you're using is a quote-unquote green dry cleaner, because I think they'll be less likely to be using these kinds of compounds. But it's really scary stuff. My mom was somebody who worked in the garment industry in New York City. And so, she likely was exposed to these kinds of compounds on a regular basis. Certain herbicides and pesticides we know are, occupationally linked to these kinds of conditions like Parkinson's disease. We breathe them in through our nose, right? They don't undergo the same degree of detoxification as an ingested compound. They can very easily bypass the blood-brain barrier. They access the olfactory bulb. Actually, a decline in sense of smell is one of the earliest features of a preclinical feature of cognitive decline, dementia, and even Parkinsonism. And so, as far as these conditions are, these compounds are in our environment, I think that's, on the one hand, it's very scary, but it's also empowering. The more awareness that we can have about reducing our exposure to these compounds, I think it's crucially important.
That's a good point, what he said about it being really scary, but awareness is supposed to help us make better decisions. And, you know, this is something that I grapple with when I trying to talk about events in the news or what's going on in the world in general. Is a lot of people want to say, I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to know what's going on in the world. But at the same time, you don't know how to navigate yourself through it sometimes if you're not aware of it. And one of the things that you find out is, just like when I started the Lion diet, it was one of those things where even for somebody who had done a low-carb diet before, like the Atkins diet back in the 2000s, and I knew the benefits of eating a lot of meat, I also was doing the different things that the Atkins diet allowed for. So I was surprised, though, to find out that you didn't have to have vegetables and greens and salads and, you know, mayonnaise and salad dressing and all that stuff. And I thought there was value in all of that stuff, but I wasn't aware that you could eat only meat and get as healthy as I've been able to get and have so many changes. But there's never a state of perfection. As long as we're in this world that we live in right now, there's never going to be a state of perfection when it comes to how our body is going to be. But I can tell you that when I started cutting all of the poisons that are in our food supply, see, he talked about things that had to do with dry cleaning and stuff that are sprayed in the air, and those are still concerns to me too, but I don't have a solution for what's in the air, with the exception of maybe using an air purifier like I have back here. You can't see it right now. Let me show you in the corner there. I have an air purifier back there next to Sam, and I use that to try to limit the amount of exposure that I have in my own house. But even that little air purifier isn't doing a whole lot more than what the vents in the ceiling are doing, where it filters the air, my return vents that are in each room. And it adds to it and takes some of those things out of there, but there's still going to be, when I go outside or when I go to the other room, I'm going to have to face those things. Worrying about microplastics, it's like you can know that microplastics are a concern because we're finding them in, like, for instance, the testicles and ovaries of men and women that they weren't supposed to be there, but like everybody they're checking, they're finding these microplastics. So you start to say, well, I'm going to get rid of plastic from my life. And I've tried to do a lot of that. Even like when I drink my water, I use a glass bottle. It's got a plastic lid on it. But the glass I figured was going to help me reduce some of that exposure to plastic. But the water I'm drinking came out of a machine that has plastic nozzles on it. And I was looking at getting a purifier from my house, but the filters are made of plastic. I mean, everywhere you look, there's plastic in our life, but I can still minimize my exposure to it. But it doesn't mean that I have to go crazy with it where I just try to say, okay, I'm not going to use anything that's modern anymore. I'm going to drink water from the stream, because now I'm dealing with the problems of whatever's in the water. It could be in bacteria or other additives of some kind, you know, whether it's animals peeing in the water or whatever. So there's no perfect situation for everything. But what we're trying to do, I think, those of us who have been on this carnivore journey are trying to get as much of the poison out of our lives as we can. And starting a carnivore way of eating was like eye-opening to me as to how much the food I was eating was affecting me, how much the drugs that I was taking from the doctor and also the recreational things I was using to ease my anxiety were affecting me in a negative way. They were actually making it like, you know, marijuana would be easily a way for me to put away all the anxiety and depression and problems that I was having for just a little while. But whenever it was gone, it was like it just came back even stronger. So I needed more to solve the problem, and then it would come back even stronger. When it came to the medicines that I was on, like the blood pressure medicine, you start looking at the possible side effects and the long-term effects of taking something like, for instance, the Cinepril. There are videos on YouTube that'll go into great detail on how people have been affected, and that was what I was taking for my blood pressure. But when I started eating the right things, my blood pressure went normal, you know? And what's even weirder is when you talk about blood pressure is the fact that they say, stay away from salt if you've got high blood pressure. Well, on this way of eating, I eat a lot of salt. And yet my blood pressure has normalized throughout the first 3 years of my diet. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to start watching this is I've been under a lot of external pressure lately that reminds me that, one, as a Christian, I need the Lord. I can't get through all this stuff on my own. And I think that's important for all of us who are believers to remember. And I know not everybody that watches my channel is a believer, but I invite you to stick around, because I'm not here to preach to anybody. I'm not a like a pastor. I'm just a regular guy, but I happen to be a believer, and I believe I have a mission to speak what I know to be the truth. And what I know to be the truth is that the Word of God has the answers for the problems in your life when you're seeking them. Anyway, the thing about this is that I'm experiencing all this pressure that's reminding me where I need to be, but I'm also noticing my body's reacting physiologically to it, to where even my blood pressure went up. And I talked to my doctor about it, and he said it has nothing to do with what's going on in your eating. It's you letting this stuff become stress in your life. And that's when I realized I need to really, I've talked about it before, but it's like it doesn't hit you that you've got to get back down to basics sometimes when it comes to what you're putting into your mind, what you're allowing yourself to do, and how you're allowing the circumstances of life to affect you. So with all that I'm going through now, I want to let you know that there is relief from the pressures of this world. There is relief from all of this poison that we have going on. But it starts with right here. In your mind, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to seek the truth? Now, seeking the truth for me has led me to faith. Seeking the truth to me has also led me to a way of eating that has allowed me to eliminate poisons from my body. Those poisons being gone from my body made it easier for me to stop putting other poisons in my body on purpose to try to ease some of the pain, to try to ease some of the things that were going on. And I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful to hear how many of you have experienced such things. But we've still got to be aware of the things that they're talking about here so that we can know what to avoid. I had no idea that dry cleaning would be such a negative effect. And I wondered, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but this is one more possible reason why 2023 for me was like there was a switch. I went from being perfect in health to starting to gain a little bit of weight, starting to get a little more tired. And I was wondering, what is going on? The new job that I started in 2023, they did dry cleaning for us on all of our uniforms. So every day I was wearing clothes that were dry cleaned. And I had no idea they were going to talk about this in the video, but it's amazing what you can find out. And now I'm thankful that I don't work at a place where I have to get my clothes dry cleaned anymore. So that's a positive, but it's one of those things you got to start looking at. And he mentioned green dry cleaners. The word green doesn't strike well with me most of the time, but if what they're saying is they're trying to keep the artificial stuff out, then I'm all for it. If they're trying to keep the artificial stuff out, that's fine. It's the artificial stuff that's in our food, that's in our drugs, that's in our apparently dry cleaning now too. Those are the things that we've really got to be on guard for so that we can have a healthy body, because a healthy body means a healthy mind. He's talked about how big of a deal it affects the mind and how these things cross the blood-brain barrier. And it's almost impossible to have a normal spiritual life if you don't feel and think normal. And we are being affected by the stuff that's in our food and the stuff that they're putting in the air, the stuff that they're using to clean our clothes. We got to be conscious of these things. Let's back up a little bit and see where he was.
Of a preclinical feature of cognitive decline, dementia, and even Parkinsonism. And so, as far as these conditions are, these compounds are in our environment, I think that's, on the one hand, it's very scary, but it's also empowering. The more awareness that we can have about reducing our exposure to these compounds, I think it's crucially important. So that's another of the modifiable risk.
Yeah, that's on the toxic exposure side.
Yeah, which I think is incredibly important. My second book, The Genius Life, was really, looked at that.
How much of an overlap do you think there is between the dietary risk and the toxic exposure risk? Because obviously well, and we'll get into this after we're done this section of the conversation, but obviously there's the carbohydrate, diabetes, obesity link, but then there's food toxicity link too.
Yeah.
Because lots of things that we think are edible would rather not be eaten, and they have, well, I mean, I've known for years that the typical plant, people are worried about the pesticides that are on plants.
Absolutely.
And fair enough, but they're not nearly as worried about the pesticides that are in plants, and there are plenty of them because, well, plants don't like being eaten by bugs, and most of them aren't that happy about being eaten by us either. And so they have got very potent chemical defenses, and they're not trivial. And I've wondered, because of my experiences with diet, I mean, I lost a lot of weight because of the diet that I'm on, and I kept it off, and that's quite the bloody miracle, that's for sure. It's really something to, like, I weigh what I weighed when I was in my 20s. You know, that's really something when you're 62. It's like, what the hell?
I'm 51.
Who knew that was possible? And I have about the same bodily composition that I did when I was in my 20s. And some of that's obviously from not eating carbohydrates, but there are other improvements that I've experienced that have made me wonder, like I had psoriasis. It's gone. And some of the psoriasis patches had lasted, well, literally decades, and they're gone. And I think, oh, well, I was obviously eating something that was causing that. Is that carbohydrate linked? Who the hell knows? But is it food toxicity linked or immunological, allergic? I don't know.
Well, I think that most people, and this is where the debate about the carnivore diet and all that, I think, becomes really interesting. You know, a robust organism such as yourself should be able to consume some of these plant, quote unquote, defense compounds and garner a degree of, you know, additional strength in so doing, right? There's this notion of hormesis where, you know, low doses of a certain stressor, you know, or toxicant, if you will, might actually cause a response in the system that actually leads to an up-leveling of robustness, of vigor, of strength.
Well, pharmacon means something like a little bit of the poison that kills you cures you.
Yeah. And so that's where I think if you have a robust, for example, gut microbiome, you know, I think that most people should be able to derive value from these kinds of compounds.
That's the theory. I mean, when you look at the average health state of the typical person, it makes you wonder, right? And I've wondered how far down the rabbit hole you have to go to get to the bottom, given how obese people are and, well, what I've seen as the consequences of a relatively radical dietary shift. So, well, that's obviously one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today. Let's turn then. We went through quite a few of the modifiable risk factors. Let's turn from that, if that's okay, unless there's any others that you'd like to specifically highlight. We could turn to that, to what you found in relationship to diet and what you've been recommending. So are there other modifiable risk factors that you think are worth concentrating on? We went through diet and exposure to pollutants and toxicity. Anything else that's directly relevant? Yeah,
well, there's a newly identified risk factor, and that is hearing loss. And that's, you know, again, newly identified. So all the research, the research that we need to make, you know, clear recommendations, other than if you have hearing loss, a hearing aid actually is a potentially, you know, can be a potential boon to health. So it's actually the loss of the auditory input. Yeah. And not a correlation between the degeneration of the ear and the degeneration of the brain. Or maybe Correct. Both. No, I mean, I think insofar as we know that social isolation, which is in fact another, you become more and more isolated, you know, in your own world. And I think that that's probably harmful. We know that depression. Depression is another one. And you know, these estimates are typically conservative. So I said at the onset about 40%, which was the number that was given, you know, most recently in this 2020 Lancet Commission on dementia prevention. But I think it's very likely that the majority of cases, at least with regard to Alzheimer's disease, and likely also even these Parkinsonian conditions, which, you know, it's becoming increasingly clear that there's an environmental toxicant aspect to them. I think that the majority, and this is just my opinion based on my, you know, assessment of the literature, are likely preventable. We don't have all the data yet, but I think given what we do currently know, we don't have to sit idly on our hands. You know, for example,
I do want to say a couple of things about what he mentioned there, where he talked about having a small degree of some kind of intoxicant or toxic, whatever particle, whatever's in the food, like what's in the vegetables, that's designed to build us up, to actually make us stronger, to be able to fight those things off. Because if we were in a complete bubble of security, then we're going to be very easily able to be exposed to negative things that would hurt us much more. And I've heard people make this argument about the lion diet, that it causes you not to be able to eat normal foods. My argument against that is the foods that we call normal aren't normal at all. And they're in such high quantities of chemical altered synthetic foods, or things that are in our food, that our bodies are so inundated with them that once you get that large quantity away from you, being exposed to it again can definitely cause you to have a reaction to it. Even as somebody who has already had such gains, I mean, I've had such amazing transformation and gains from this way of eating that, and at age 51 and 3.5 years in, I'm still maintaining a weight lower than I was in high school. Even when I got down to my high school wrestling weight, which I had to work to get down to at 189, I'm only 8 pounds or 9 pounds above that right now. And that's with all the cortisol reaction of the things going on in my life. So it is true that it is amazing what diet can do. It also is true that there's a lot more stuff that we're exposed to that we're not thinking about what we're exposed to, and that if we use some common sense and we make some good decisions, we can avoid some of these things, but we've got to be willing to look into them. We've got to be willing to listen to somebody who's talking about where these dangers are coming from. Now, of course, there's always the potential for people to use fear-mongering to get more of an audience, and that's definitely not what I'm here about. I'm here about trying to show you that there is a better way than what we've been doing, what we've been eating in our regular diet. I still go to the store all the time, and I even have gone to fast food restaurants and gotten maybe a hamburger patty when I was in a pinch or something like that. And then I find out that even the sugar the salt has sugar in it at those restaurants. But then I see people, though, that just walk up there and they order this stuff for their kids and they dump ketchup all over it, which is loaded with high fructose corn syrup. And there's so many other dyes. There's probably not even tomato in the ketchup at some point. So, I mean, there's nothing natural about what they're eating. And we keep eating it and feeding it to our families. And we look around and see this constant growing issue of obesity and metabolic illness. And on top of that, we see with the rise in dementia and Parkinson's, having worked in the elderly care community, I remember even in just the roughly 13 years since I entered that industry, that there wasn't that many cases of dementia and Alzheimer's. But as time progressed, it seemed like we were seeing more and more cases just in the small little community that I was working with, where people were having dementia far more frequently than they were before. And then when you watch the news, it's confirmed in that. So my personal experience and what I see, about things like where they're talking about here, about the rise in dementia and Parkinsonism, it's real. And it's coming from all the stuff that we're putting into our bodies that is making such a big difference. There's no perfect solution for any of this, but you can limit your exposure to these foods. I think eating an all-meat diet has been great for me because it's limited my exposure to those things that once I had leaky gut. The reason why I don't try to bring vegetables back in is that my leaky gut is still there. It's just not as strong as it used to be. It definitely doesn't hurt like it used to. It doesn't hurt at all if I don't eat the wrong things. So I stay away from those things completely. But I still tell my family, stop eating that processed garbage. Stop eating those things that are bad for you. Even if you don't want to go full carnivore, I think that there is a way that you can eat healthier. But when you've got companies spraying all of their food with glyphosate or glyphosate, I always forget which way to say that, Roundup basically, that stuff isn't coming out of there. And the way they harvest wheat for instance, is they kill it with Roundup so that it's easier to harvest. And then they wash it and all of those things, but it's still there and it's still getting into your bodies. And all these cereals I see my friends, my children's friends eating, and I think to myself, gosh, you guys are just pouring this poison inside your bodies. And I already see the effect it's having on them. You know, children are reaching puberty far earlier than they ever did in the past. Exposure to these ultra-processed foods, to these chemicals, to carbohydrates, to sugar, to seed oils, all the things that in our food. And then on top of that, the stuff that's being put into the air and into the water, it's having a big effect on us. The constant use of plastic, it makes you wonder where you can turn. Well, you can do the best you can to stay healthy. It's like the Bible says, exercise is of little use. It's not saying it's of no use. It's good to take care of your body, but you've got to take care of your mind. And for me, that's where it goes into the spiritual realm. And being free from all the poisons in my body and in my mind that I've been plagued with for so much of my life has made it so much easier for me to be able to focus on the spiritual, even when the trials of life come, when the difficulties come, when the pressures come down from places that we have no control over, when we find out that all of our food is being poisoned and our doctors are just being trained to prescribe medicine and not actually cure anything. It can cause additional anxiety on top of all the reactions that you're having from these things when you know that's going on. But it doesn't have to be anxiety. It doesn't have to be stress in your soul. You can trust the Lord that He's going to deliver us through this. He's going to eventually reveal the truth on all these things. And more, I'm seeing the truth being revealed. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful for this community full of people who many of you have told me you are Christians too and wanting to understand why the carnivore way of eating is working so good. And then you hear people talking about, you know, this is what our cavemen were doing millions of years ago and stuff like that. And you think, well, I don't even know if I believe all that stuff. All I know is it just in the past few hundred years, we can take a look at what's in our food, our air, and our water and realize that these things are having an effect on us. And as we start to get those things out of our lives, then we're going to be a lot better off. And as we can think clearer and operate our bodies clearer and stronger and be the men and women that we're supposed to be leading our families, then we can also have that spiritual relationship. It's just amazing everything that Lion Diet has been able to expose me to. I mean, I've been a Christian all my life, but you probably wouldn't have known it to look at me because I was very caught up in the things that were the trappings of the world, let's say. And I loved to eat all different types of food. Now, I love to eat food that keeps me healthy and happy. I'm thankful to God for the animals that He put here that give me the healthy body and mind that I've been able to experience from this. I'm thankful to God for even showing me that this was the truth. And I hope that this helps you to know that you don't have to stress and fuss over all the things that you don't have control over, but you can make decisions for yourself that are good and put your faith where it needs to be. And for me, that's faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. I appreciate you guys watching today. I hope you got something valuable out of this, and I'll see you guys next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?
One of the things I do to fight back against big food and big pharma is to recommend companies that make animal-based products that are good for our bodies and good for our skin. In this case, I'm talking about Vintage Tradition. Vintage Tradition tallow balms are a go-to for me now, especially the unscented one. I like it because it doesn't have anything extra in it other than extra virgin olive oil and tallow rendered from suet. This is the interior fat, also called suet or kidney fat. For the tallow they use making the tallow balm, highly saturated and therefore more therapeutic than any other. They don't use any trim fat or any other fats besides suet. So if you want some ancestrally appropriate skincare products that are going to help support the carnivore movement, head over to vintagetradition.com and use my discount code Dante, D-A-N-T-E, to save 10% on your order. I promise you won't regret it. Their products are fantastic. I love them and I use them all the time.